Vic Mullen, grumpy old Scotsman. Let's move away from poking fun at Labour, which, quite frankly, is too easy of a target. With the it's like every day they're doing something stupid. So let's move away from the easy target right now, because but picking a subject or look at a subject that's a lot more closer to a lot more people's hearts. The National Health Service. The good old NHS. Now, I've had and still do have a lot of dealings with the NHS because I have some health problems. Not serious, but they are health problems. Type 2 diabetes, I take metformin for that. I wear glasses, I'm practically blind without the damn things. And I've got stomach issues, had stomach issues for the better part of 2 decades now. So I've had first-hand experience in the NHS up here in Scotland. So for the people outside of the UK that's watching this, and I've been noticing, because I've got the subscribe thing switched on so I can see who's subscribing, there's some names that I don't recognise from people in the vaping scene. So for the people that are new to this channel, I've got a second channel called Vaping with Vic, and I review e-cigarette devices. Now that channel's got like 77,000 subscribers, but I've been noticing this channel's beginning to bring in some new people that I don't recognise. So yeah, you're going to see me vape a lot during these videos, just warning you now. But for the people that are outside the UK that don't know what the NHS is all about, the NHS is basically social health care. Now, I know over in the United States, you mention socialist and you're immediately tarred with the communist brush. There is a difference between centre-left socialism and left to far-left communism. Big difference. The NHS was formed just after the Second World War here in the UK. It was formed by the Labour Party, who came into power after the general election directly after World War II. And the whole point of the social healthcare system set up by Labour more than 60, 70 years ago now was basically to make healthcare free at the point of use. That was the whole point of the NHS. Unlike the American system, where they basically bleed you dry, either the hospitals bleed you dry or the insurance company bleeds you dry, here it's government ran. Now, I can only look at this from the aspect of me, what I've been through, at least in the last 10 years, the last decade or so. So about 10 years ago, had a problem with the gallbladder. That's what led me to vaping, actually. I gave up smoke. Well, I gave up smoking because one of the specialists there said that my lungs had started to deform because of my heavy smoking habit. And that scared the crap out of me, and I started vaping. Been vaping ever since, hence the other channel. But doctor's appointment, because I had a little bit, it was a lot of pain down here, and I went there and the doctor poked and prodded me and went, that's not good, it's not appendicitis, but it could be your gallbladder. And I was in a lot of pain, and that was even with a tramadol. The pain was still coming through after I popped a tramadol. So the doctor went, yeah, I'm sending you to a specialist in Crosshouse. So Crosshouse is the closest local NHS hospital. The next day, I went there. So doctor's appointment was free, by the way. Went to see the specialist at Crosshouse, free. The specialist again poked and prodded me and went, yeah, that's your gallbladder. After they'd done some kind of imaging thing. They done an imaging, I don't know what the right term for it is because I'm not a medical person, but they done some imaging thing, and it was like, yeah, your gallbladder's inflamed, we're going to have to remove that. So they kept me in hospital and they put me in a bed in a ward with other people with stomach issues and stuff. I was in the hospital for 3 days. On the second day, the gallbladder was removed. Third day, I was kept in for basically observation. Fourth day, it was like, okay, you're fine, see ya. And they gave me some, it wasn't tramadol, what was it? Cocodamol? I think it wasn't paracetamol. I think it was cocodamol they gave me. So, just to recap, doctor's appointment and visit, free. Consultation with the specialist, free. Operation to get the gallbladder whipped out, a laparoscopy, it was keyhole surgery, free. Third day in the hospital bed for recovery, free. The 50 cocodamol tablets, free. I didn't have to pay a thing. Glasses. I wear glasses. I am extremely short-sighted. Without these, I can see about this far. Out there, it just turns into a blur. Extremely short-sighted. Kind of runs in the family, the short-sighted thing. Now, right now, I'm on universal credit. So, technically speaking, I'm on job seekers allowance, but I'm still self-employed. So, I'm on UC under the self-employed category. So, I am currently working on the other channel, the Vaping with Vic channel, to try and stop the ship from sinking, which is bloody difficult. But yeah, I'm currently in universal credit, so because I'm on job seekers allowance, there are some frames and some simpler lenses that are free. Free frames, free lenses. Okay, they're really cheap looking frames and they're not the best lenses out there, but I would be able to see. Now, these frames I've got here, along with the lenses, I got these when I actually had a decent steady income from Vaping with Vic. They're varifocal lenses. They're not bifocal with a little half moon down there where you need to tip your head up to read. These are varifocal. So these lenses were like £300 and the frames were 50 quid. But because I'm on universal credit, if I walk in and get the eye test done, I can get the frames or a specific set of frames for free and a more simpler style of lens for free. Now, even if I am working, doesn't matter what kind of income I'm getting in. I could be getting in a minimum wage, or I could be making £1 million a year. The actual eye test, free. I've also got type 2 diabetes. I'm taking metformin for that. Type 2 diabetes. I also go in for the diabetic, what's the name for it? Diabetic retinopathy test, where they take a deep look at your eye to see if your diabetes is having any impact on the lens or the iris. Free. I mentioned my type 2 diabetes. Metformin, the prescription, free. I've also got stomach issues, GERD, esomeprazole, free. I'm also on simvastatin because, I'm Scottish. My diet's not all that good. I like fried food. Simvastatin for the high cholesterol, free. The NHS, free. Well, not so much to do with the well, there is free options for lenses and frames, but mainly to do with the body itself, right? The body itself. Prescriptions up here in Scotland are free. Doctor's consultancy, free. Trip to the hospital, free. Any kind of getting your gallbladder removed, or getting a leg set if you've broken your leg, free. When it comes to opticians and when it comes to dentistry, things get a little bit iffy depending on your circumstances, depending on your income, and more especially depending on what country in the UK you're from. Now, I know that down south in England, they've got to pay for their prescription. It's something like, what's the price now? Somebody in England's going to comment down there. I think it's something like, the last I checked, it was £9.50, or was it £10.50? It might be up from that, but there is a capped limit of £9.50 or £10.50 or something, which is basically $14 if you're in the United States. A cap limit of £9.50 or £10.50 or something like that per prescription. Up here in Scotland, though, it's free. So I'm on simvastatin, esomeprazole, and metformin for the type 2 diabetes. All of them free. Actually, I need to go to the pharmacy next week for a top up of the simvastatin because I'm running out. So that's the NHS in a nutshell. It's government ran healthcare, and it was set up by the Labour Party at the very end of the Second World War, because at that point in time the UK was not only devastated because of the London Blitz, we were also bankrupt. The Second World War literally bankrupted the country. Completely bankrupted it. Also, when it comes to the NHS, there has been, at least for the past 20 years, probably more than that, getting closer to 30 years, a big problem with the NHS. Successive governments roundabout since the late 1970s, all through the 1980s, all through the 1990s, and up through the zeros, the 10s and the 20s up to the present day, at least for the past 40 to 50 years, have been throwing progressively larger amounts of money at the NHS, whether it's a Conservative Party or whether it's a Labour Party in power. But the service, and a lot of people will attest to this, the service seems to be getting worse. And the big question here is, can the NHS actually be saved? Because the whole analogy of the NHS turning into a black hole and essentially sucking all the money in from government is starting to become true. Did you know that the UK government is currently spending £258 billion UK pounds on the NHS every single year? And it's not just that. A lot of news stories, usually from the gutter press, usually from left-wing gutter press, had said that over the past 14 years of Tory rule, that the Tories always cut spending to the NHS. That's technically not true, though. Have they cut spending to the NHS, or have they reduced extra spending to the NHS? To answer that question, we've got to go back to 1997, when Tony Blair won his first general election and started his first term as Prime Minister. Up until that point in time, with Margaret Thatcher and the single term of John Major, the 16-year run of Tory rule that led up to Tony Blair winning that first election in 1997, spending on the NHS was capped at an upper limit that was actually set by the previous Labour Party before Thatcher came into power. What Thatcher basically done was get that upper limit per capita spending percentage and lock it into law. Now, ever since that upper spend limit's been put in by Margaret Thatcher in the mid-1980s, no successive government, whether it was Tony Blair's in 1997 or whether it was David Cameron and Nick Clegg's coalition government at the end of Gordon Brown's premiership, or whether it was Cameron by himself, who came after him, Cameron by himself, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss for 40 days, or Rishi Sunak, and now Keir Starmer. None of those premierships, which is Labour and the Tories, have actually come close to the upper cap limit. Thatcher put the upper cap limit in to make sure that the NHS didn't become some huge, which is what it's basically now turned into, let's be honest, but the NHS never turned into some huge massive black hole that started sucking all the money in and nobody knows where the money was being spent. So technically speaking, for the past 40 years, spending has actually increased on the NHS in real monetary terms. But certain governments decided to lower down or completely reduce to almost 0% the percentage increase every successive year. And that was started by Tony Blair. Wasn't started by David Cameron. Tony Blair ridiculously underspent on the National Health Service. And what Tony Blair done, and this is basically what led to the problems that we're facing right now in the NHS. What Tony Blair done was essentially break up the National Health Service into trust systems. So the local hospital that I talked about is called NHS Trust Crosshouse University Hospital. It's one of the university hospitals where a lot of doctors, a lot of specialists, and most nurses who end up with a job in Scotland, they actually train in university hospitals. I think there's something similar down south in England as well. But spending by the government was capped out by Thatcher. and spending was limited further down the line by local authorities because it now became the job of the individual NHS trust. I think you know where I'm going with this. It became the job of the individual NHS trust to, number one, improve their services. Number two, show, what's the word they used what's the word that Tony Blair used? Economic frugalness, I think he used. Some daft collection of words in the 1999 budgetary plan. Some kind of economic frugalness or something Gordon Brown as Chancellor said. So they had to do these two things. And if they were shown to be increasing services and shown to not cut spending, but spend the money more wisely, the government, as in Westminster, would funnel a little bit more money into that particular trust. Now, the problem is some trusts work better than other trusts. Number one, it depends where that hospital is. Crosshouse Hospital is literally between two major settlements. Kilmarnock, which is more centrally Scotland, Kilmarnock, and of course Ayrshire, which is where I am. We don't have any major cities close to us. Irvine's got a population of round about 30,000. Kilmarnock's got a population of round about 40,000. Crosshouse Hospital also serves Kilwinning, which is a smaller village to the south of us, and it also serves the three towns, which is north of us, Ardrossan, Saltcoats and Stevenson. And combined, those three towns have roughly the population similar to Irvine. So we're talking 30,000. There is no cities close to Crosshouse Hospital, which is why Crosshouse is one of the better performing NHS trusts in Scotland. However, if you're a hospital in Glasgow, it's a different kettle of fish. Because Glasgow is a much, much bigger catchment area, and because Glasgow's got a population, at least central Glasgow, a population damn near over 1 million, NHS trusts there are beginning to struggle. And the same can be said for NHS trusts down south in England. You generally tend to find the NHS trusts that are more based in the countryside of England, like Surrey, Sussex, that kind of thing, generally tend to perform better than NHS trusts that are on the outskirts, the inner outer ring of Greater London, or the centre of London itself. Again, bigger catchment area, more population, more pressure. Now, the trust system that was implemented at the end of John Major's term and fully implemented during Tony Blair's term as 3 terms as Prime Minister was implemented to do one thing and one thing only: take the monetary pressure off of central government and put the onus of not only financial frugalness but also an increase in operational success on the onus of the trust boards of each individual trust up and down the length of Great Britain. Now, in theory, that could have worked. But then the big problem started. You see, if you give individual hospitals, individual catchment areas that are surrounding 2 or 3 hospitals under the same trust, if you give them practically autonomous running of their own systems, what do you think's going to happen? Yeah, middle management starts to explode. Bureaucracy starts to exponentially breed within those separate NHS trusts. This is why you end up with, I think it was in Northampton. One of the NHS trusts in Northampton, at the end of February, and this was all over the news up here in Scotland. I don't know if it was in the news, but it was all over the news up here. One of the NHS trusts in Northamptonshire was advertising for a DEI administrator, a Department of Equity and Inclusiveness administrator. And what was that DEI's administrator's pay? £750,000 a year. Let that sink in. They weren't a doctor. They weren't a nurse. They weren't a specialist surgeon. They weren't even a hospital porter. It was a DEI administrator for hiring of diverse something inclusiveness. The what? Basically, it was this person's job to make sure they weren't always hiring white people. That's essentially what the job description basically came down to. You have got a quota. You need to hire X amount of white people, X amount of Asian people, X amount of black people. That's your quota. And we're going to pay you £750,000 a year to make sure that job's done right. This is the problem the NHS trusts have. Now, I will say, not all trusts are guilty of this. Not all trusts are. But if you look at a lot of the trusts that are struggling or are very near bankruptcy, as some of them have publicly said, there is some NHS trusts around London and some NHS trusts around Birmingham that have publicly stated they are within a year of declaring bankruptcy. And when an NHS trust declares bankruptcy, it's only happened twice before. What basically needs to happen is the government rushes in and pours suitcases of cash into the funds of that NHS trust. Is the board of that NHS trust fired? No. Is there an independent adjudicator, an ombudsman essentially, that's hired in to look at that NHS trust's books? No. Is the government involved in looking at the accounts of that NHS trust to find out where the millions of pounds have went that have been frittered away by that NHS trust? No. This is why the NHS trust system is the biggest single mistake that's happened to the National Health Service for the past 50, 60 years. It's also the biggest reason that the NHS is actually starting to fail. Because in some parts of the country, some NHS trusts are run really well. And to be honest, I would count the North Ayrshire and Arran NHS Trust that holds places like Crosshouse Hospital and, for that matter, Ayr Hospital. They're both run. Okay, they've got some problems, long waiting lists, but that's the same everywhere. But they're generally ran very well. But there's some trusts that aren't. And the problem is, it's the trusts that are not ran well that's ever increasing central government's bailout of suitcases of cash being randomly thrown at these NHS trusts that have got poor management, poor infrastructure, but then again the infrastructure can kind of be blamed on the poor management for hiring DEI administrators rather than buying in new infrastructure. So again, everything falls down to the NHS trust's management. Let's take a look at this. Spending to do with the NHS. Where are we here? No, that's the wrong one. There we go. So here's the UK here. This is how much the UK is spending per capita for 2022 and 2023. Now, the United States that you're seeing all the way to the right-hand side, the United States is an outlier. Because the United States is based on a purely capital-based, along with fucking insurance gouging everyone's kidneys out, the US is an outlier. You've got to ignore that. What you're concentrating on is all the other countries next to it. Now take a look at where the UK is. Yes, we're spending less than Switzerland, we're spending less than Germany, we're spending less than France, Belgium, Austria and Australia. But look, we're actually spending more than Japan. Now looking at the expenditure per capita, we're not much far behind France and Germany. We are slightly above Japan. And you look at the healthcare system over in Japan? Sure. It is different from the socialist healthcare system we've got here in the UK. But the government actually does spend a fair amount of yen, oh, that's the Japanese currency, a fair amount of yen on standard healthcare in Japan. And if you look at that graph again, France and Germany, more so France, have got a very similar system of healthcare compared to the UK. The German system is much more of a cross between the UK and US. That's why their spending is up quite a bit compared to ours. And Switzerland, which is a massive outlier, is basically outspending the rest of Europe when it comes to their healthcare system. But the Swiss healthcare system is much more closer to the US healthcare system than it is to the UK. What we need to concentrate on here is Japan, France, and Canada. So we are spending more than Japan. We're spending less than France and Canada are kind of neck and neck when it comes to healthcare. So for £258 billion a year, which is what the UK is spending, we're actually getting less of a service than the equivalent amount of money being spent in France, Canada, and Japan. More so Japan. So it begs the question, can the NHS actually be saved? Because here's the problem we've now got. And it's a problem that's been plaguing successive governments, whether it's Conservative or whether it's Labour. It's been plaguing successive governments. Doesn't matter how much money you throw at the NHS, you're throwing money into a bottomless pit. This is not the fault of the nurses. This is not the fault of the surgeons. It's not the fault of the doctors. It's not the fault of the frontline staff in the NHS. It's the fault of the NHS trust administrators. Now again, there are some well-run NHS trusts, but those well-run NHS trusts are the exception and they're not the rule. The basic facts is simple. Most NHS trusts are bottomless pits of money. Doesn't matter how much cash you throw at that trust, the administrators of that trust is going to find a way to basically waste it. For instance, hiring DEI administrators for £750,000 a year. That's baseline salary, by the way. £750,000 for a DEI administrator. And that hospital trust in Northampton wasn't the only one doing this. Just think how much new hospital equipment £750,000 can buy. Yeah. What it's going to take is a complete restructuring of the National Health Service. And the only party to actually talk about it is Reform. Now, you'll probably notice that there. That's a Reform UK sticker. I'm no longer a member of Reform, though, because I've noticed that Nigel Farage is starting to flip-flop around and doing complete 180s on his previous statements to do with illegal immigration and to do with immigration as a whole. I think what Farage is trying to do is court the left of politics along with the right of politics to make it look like Reform UK is a centrist party. That sticker might still be there. I'm just not supporting them anymore, and I forgot to take the sticker down. But Farage had a good idea, and this was about 5 or 6 years ago before Reform even actually came up. Scrap the NHS trust system. Scrap it. And what needs to happen, and I kind of agree with him here, what needs to happen is the system that was put in place before the NHS trust system was actually a thing. NHS Scotland, NHS England, NHS Wales, NHS Northern Ireland have 4 trusts. 4 of them. And each of those trusts take care of the country that they're based in. There was something similar set up by Margaret Thatcher in 1982 that was torn down in 1997-98 by the NHS trust system, which took its place. It is far better to have centralised control of each country rather than individual regional control tied to a bunch of administrators who don't even live in that area, which is the case for a lot of NHS trusts. They are headed in the administration team by people who don't know the local area, don't know the healthcare needs of the local area, have no idea of the demographics of the local area, and don't even live in the local area. And that's the reason a lot of these trusts are starting to fail, because the overall administrative team that's dishing out the money have no clue where they're dishing out the money to and what they're dishing out the money for. And 9 times out of 10, the people at the top of the NHS trusts, they're not doctors, they're not specialists, they're not nurses. Most of them are former CEOs of larger businesses who have landed in the cushiest job possible, the head of an NHS trust. The current state of the NHS is not the fault of the doctors, not the fault of the nurses, not the fault of the specialists. The slow train wreck, and that's what it basically is, the slow train wreck of what the NHS is turning into, is not the fault of any one particular government or one particular Prime Minister. It's the conglomerate fault of a whole string of Prime Ministers from Labour through to, from Labour, this was pre-Thatcher, through to Conservative, Thatcher, Major, through to Labour again, Blair with the implementation of the NHS trust system, through to Conservative and Lib Dems, Cameron, Nick Clegg, who kept the trust system going, through the rest of the Conservative premiership, all the way up to Rishi Sunak, and now Keir Starmer under Labour, who's not doing a thing to address the problem with the NHS trust system. The trust system needs to go. And country control of the entire NHS system needs to be implemented again, very similar to what Thatcher did in the mid-1980s. And that will, number one, get rid of a whole load of waste, and number two, you might actually end up hiring people that know what they're actually doing. Anyway, that's it from me, folks. Have a good one.